Welcome back to The Gamer. Today we're discussing video game art because, well, have you ever noticed errors in some of the game art of the industry's top titles? We have too. It's actually surprising how often this happens. From the earliest classics to the latest releases, we delve into some of the most unforgettable mistakes that somehow made it into the final production. If you haven't already, support the team. Click the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest content. Stick around as we take a stroll down memory lane and look at 10 unforgettable video game box art mistakes. Spirit Camera, the Cursed Memoir. Okay, let's kick this shebang off with one for the Nintendo 3DS fans out there. Maybe you'll know, but this game is a spin-off of the Fatal Frame series, a well-loved spooky game where you have a camera and ghosts appear around you. It made for a bunch of scary moments in video games and earned a spot alongside such greats like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The actual game cover has a part of a ghost and a spooky environment, but there's definitely no camera to be seen. Instead, there's a book. You heard that right, a book. It's supposed to be a reference to the game itself, where the main story revolves around a girl named Maya who's somehow trapped in a scary monster book or something. There are AR elements in the game, which is an interesting way to integrate the features of the 3DS, but still the book is accessed with the 3DS's camera called the Camera Obscura in-game, and that's still not referenced in the cover, but they went with the book. And while we cue the facepalm gifs, it should be confessed we sort of recognize this hubris. Someone clearly could not have cared less. Gal Gun Double Piece. Time to laugh. Take a look at this picture. E for everyone? Why? For suggestive content, of course. Said no one ever. This is one of those games. If someone sees this in your game library, they're immediately gonna have their judgy eyes all over you, and it may or may not be completely warranted. Let's be honest though, it'll be completely warranted. Judgments aside, the meat of Gal Gun Double Piece is something that could never be interpreted as family friendly. It's a rail shooter that involves you shooting questionably aged Japanese schoolgirls with your love gun. We promise you that sentence is completely factual. You will indeed shoot young girls with your love gun. So why, in all possible realms of existence, did the actual physical copies of this game, which exist solely for those who want to hold their bad decisions in their hands, have an E rating? Even more mind-boggling, why does it say it's rated E even when it's saying it's got suggestive content? You know, like the other suggestive content found in E-rated games? Let's rewind. Maybe not all E games passed the morality test, or someone was asleep on the job. Either way, this game somehow made it to the store shelves with an E rating. Hola! Did you hear about the latest addition to our family? The Richest Español is the perfect place for all you native Spanish speakers out there. Don't speak Spanish? No problem, come on over. This is the perfect place to practice. Amazing facts, interesting people, and funny pictures. Check out the Richest Español today. The Imagine series. Another title for you Nintendo 3DS fans. This one's for a game you probably never bought, but seriously guys, we need to talk about shovelware. Please don't buy it, and please don't let your parents or grandparents buy it and act like it's a nice thing. It's not. Being a part of the problem is never a nice thing, and until we stop being the problem, we're still gonna get games like the Imagine series. A giant pile of misogyny, the series suggests the woman's main role in society is to cook, clean, take care of things, and have babies. Oh, right, this video is about video game covers. It turns out this series was created by people so lazy they couldn't be bothered to remove the watermarks from the awful stock photo pictures they used to make the cover art. And there's way too many games in this series. Well, even one game is too many games, but there have been way too many mistakes in previous games for this to have been done on purpose. Maybe it's just a problem prone to the Nintendo 3DS given the whole shovelware thing, but we suspect there are more games which were lost in translation. Super Mario Galaxy. We're not doing our jobs if we're not making you laugh, and here we go with another one sure to make you smile. Let's talk about Super Mario Galaxy. If there's one thing the Mario series is known for, it's repeating the same pattern, and people still buy the game like it's the second coming. Every Mario game is made for the whole family to enjoy. You're jumping on enemies and collecting stars. It's pure video game fun. However, we know E doesn't always mean for everyone, and we know that Disney has had its run-ins with creative illustrators in the past. But back to Mario. When this game made its big debut on the Wii, everyone was psyched. Super Mario Galaxy was a return to the classic gameplay, but it had a spacey setting and a different princess. The cover, however, had everyone's inner middle school kid chuckling and snorting. Turns out the game's cover placed stars over certain letters in the game's name. That made it spell out, "You are Mr. Gay." It was obviously a really funny coincidence, but there was no way it wasn't gonna get lampooned by the internet. BOMBERSHOCK. Sometimes there's no way to unsee something once you've seen it. This is one for all our BioShock fans out there. We hope you don't think those big daddies are soft after we tell you this one. In BioShock 2, you were in the shoes of one of BioShock 1's big scary monsters, the Big Daddies. It also took steps to more fully develop the world of Rapture and the complex, symbiotic relationship between Big Daddies and Little Sisters in the BioShock universe. But even though Take-Two was unhappy with the game selling less than 5 million copies across all platforms in 2 months, it was a great companion and successor to a game that injected story, philosophy, and didactic storytelling into a bloated genre with generic plots about shooting all the bad guys. The game's cover, however, was nothing short of a betrayal. Although it had the glowing, creepy eyes of the little sister, the massive drill of the Big Daddy, and the rust-covered logo almost out-fallouting Fallout, the Big Daddy's helmet looks too much like another, less serious video game character. Just look at the picture, folks. There's no way you're not seeing Bomberman from here on out whenever you look at this picture. Super Mario Bros. We'd probably looked at the original Super Mario Bros. Cartridge about 5 billion times by the time we turned 10. It's a conservative amount, so imagine our surprise when we looked at the cover for the 5 billionth and first time and we realized Mario is running into a wall. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, physically, and judging by the motion lines he's built up behind him, he's doing it with a ton of force. We would also like to make it known here that Mario knows he's gonna die as well. How do we know this, you ask? Well, he's doing what we did when we realized we'd screwed up in a Mario game. Hit all the buttons. That's why he shot a fireball into the wall in the desperate hope somehow that'll save him. It will not. He'll fall into the lava and have to run the level all over again, which, since we're thinking about it, is an accurate depiction of the game playing experience. If anything, at some point you'll run into a wall, panic press all the buttons on your controller just before you meet certain death, and then you'll die. Fitting. FIFA 08. Sports games have a history of being almost as bad at Photoshop as some magazines. Although Cosmopolitan and Vanity Fair may have them beat on race exclusivity and body dysmorphia, sports games have a tendency to turn the people on their covers into Supermen, normal human locomotion be forgotten, or normal human anatomy be forgotten. The body dysmorphia occurs to both sexes here, people. But with FIFA 08, not only do we have 3 of the most ridiculous celebratory faces, which without context seem like the most hilarious faces we've ever seen, but what in the heck did they do to Ronaldinho's arm? He's the guy in the middle for all you footy fanatics. His arm looks like it's some bizarre folded over chicken wing. Also, his fist is the same size as his entire shoulder muscle. There's so many things wrong here, you have to wonder why this picture was the best one out of the millions of pictures they took. It's not like EA didn't have the money to make a decent cover. Maybe they didn't care or didn't have the time, because who really looked at the covers anyways? Not us, no, not the ones who just spent $60 on the game. GoldenEye 007. Listen, we know, any criticism of GoldenEye is borderline blasphemous at best, but we've spoken about how awesome of a game GoldenEye is time and time again. It was a magical game that made us all believe we were a tiny Asian man chopping Pierce Brosnan or whatever you guys did with it. Whatever, what we did doesn't matter, it's the memories that do, and one of the things most people don't remember is the black and white used in the game's cover art. It ends up giving those who look at it too long a pretty entertaining optical illusion. Let us know in the comment section if you already knew this one. See, it turns out when you put a black and white hand next to a black and white mouth, the finger separation and shade from the gun the hand happens to be holding ends up creating a really long, stern expression. Maybe they should have switched the color palette up, but even then, the damage has been done. In this case, what's been seen can never truly be unseen. And for this iconic title, the game developers gave Pierce Brosnan, aka 007, aka Bond James Bond, a frog face. It's hard to take him seriously after this gaffe. Mega Man. This one's hard. We can't just figure out how to approach this. If you thought you were going to get a nice little intro to segue into the meat of this title, you were wrong. Honestly, there's not much we can really say. You'll just have to look at this photo to see what we're talking about here. Because with just one look, even if you've never played a single video game, let alone if you're familiar with the artwork of Keiji Inafune, you know something is wrong. Just from the cut rate art school standpoint, what the heck? Are his shoulders and collarbones C-shaped? Where are his forearms? How is the hand holding the gun even physically possible? Why is he holding a gun? This is the North American cover. The Japanese cover looks like this. It's actually decent. It just seems like when it got to Capcom of America, they thought the cartoony art style wouldn't fly, even though anime and Japanese art weren't unpopular to North American audiences. So we got this incredibly dated, realistic fantasy sci-fi stuff that's only good to laugh at. But if you have it, it's also good enough to hang on your wall because let's face it, we're guessing some of you are out there. Eric and the Floaters. And last but not least, we present to you the pinnacle of our list, the top achievement in all things poor video game artwork. Before we get started, a little history. This game was essentially just Bomberman with a different name and was released in Europe in 1983. From a design standpoint, the cover makes it look like the full title of the game is Kuma MSX Eric and the Floaters. But Kuma is actually just the name of the publisher, and MSX is the gaming system. And that's where things start to get weird. We're not sure if you can technically call this cover a mistake, but it's something. For some reason, Kuma's font seems to be very similar to another famous fantasy game, Loom, which was released by LucasArts back in 1990. But then look at the character on the cover. Presumably Eric, he bears a striking resemblance to a certain whip-wielding hero of the big screen. That's right, Indy. That's not weird, we hear you saying. Indiana Jones was released before Eric and the Floaters. And we can admit that, sure, but look in his hand. That's not simply a potato. It looks almost exactly like a Sankara stone from the movie The Temple of Doom released in 1984. Speaking of Doom, here's the absolute weirdest thing about this cover. It's eerily similar to the iconic Doom box art, and Doom didn't come out until 1993, a full decade after Eric and the Floaters. So somehow Eric and the Floaters either deeply inspired or somehow predicted the Temple of Doom, Loom, and Doom. And that's it for us on this video. What did you think? Did we miss any glaringly bad video game art? Let us know in the comments section below. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do so. While you're at it, take a look at our awesome playlist. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.
Nintendo is one of the most important and iconic companies in the video game industry. They make some of the most interesting hardware on the market and load it up with amazing games. But that doesn't mean the Mario company gets everything right. Here are the 10 most unforgettable mistakes Nintendo has made. Before we dive in, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with our videos. Okay, let's take a look at 10 unforgettable Nintendo video game mistakes. The Wii U. Here are two seemingly contradictory ideas. 1, the Wii U was a worthy console. 2, it was also a terrible mistake. Dun dun dun. It's easy to see how the Wii U catastrophe happened. Back in 2012, Nintendo was riding high on the success of the Wii. The Wii sold incredible numbers because it appealed to Nintendo fans and casual players alike. They were sold out all over the place. Games like Super Mario Galaxy and Twilight Princess were enough to convince loyal Nintendo fans to buy a Wii, and the user-friendly motion control sold it to the casual sector. People who hadn't played a game console in decades bought a Wii, just so they could play virtual bowling and tennis. Grandparents bought a Wii. Aunts and uncles bought a Wii. It also helped that it was much cheaper than competing game consoles. Everybody had a Wii. After selling 100 million Wiis, of course Nintendo thought the Wii U would sell. The problem was, it didn't. Despite spending 5 years on the market, the Wii U would become the worst-selling Nintendo console of all time. One problem was Nintendo bungling the announcement so badly, many people who watched didn't realize a new console had been announced at all. Another problem was that the Wii U's pricey gamepad controller didn't offer any obvious advantage. Third-party developers shied away, and so did potential customers. Thankfully, Nintendo seems to be back on track with the Switch, a console players actually want to buy. Go figure. The Nintendo 3DS launch. Speaking of troubled consoles, the Nintendo 3DS also got off to a rough start. Following in the shadow of the Nintendo DS, the best-selling handheld video game console in history, Nintendo must have been feeling pretty smug about itself. The new big innovation for Nintendo's next handheld, the 3DS, was that it could display 3D graphics without making players strap on a pair of dumb-looking glasses. Unfortunately, just as buyers rejected the supposed 3D television revolution, they weren't too keen to shell out a bunch of cash for a 3D handheld gaming system either. Initial sales numbers were so bad, Nintendo had to cut the price by $80 just 4 months after launch. To appease early buyers who paid full price and felt duped out of their money, Nintendo gave them a digital slate of 20 classic games from the NES and Game Boy Advance. 20 games! Now there's a deal. Despite the ill will Nintendo earned during the 3DS's launch, the system eventually achieved a good deal of success, selling 70 million units during its lifetime. That's less than half of what the DS sold, but it's about the best Nintendo could have expected, seeing as it launched during the smartphone era. Turns out it's tough to sell someone a dedicated portable gaming device when people can just pull out their phone and have access to hundreds of thousands of games. Yeah, that makes some sense. Using cartridges for Nintendo 64. Technology was at a crossroads in 1996. Sony had just entered into the video game space a year before with the original PlayStation, which sported the relatively new technology of CD-ROMs. Compared to cartridges, CDs were dirt cheap to make and offered all the storage video games needed to hold three-dimensional worlds for players to explore. On the other hand, cartridges would load much faster than CDs, but at a sizable cost. Cartridge storage was expensive, which meant big games were expensive to produce. When it came time to make a successor to the SNES, Nintendo went with cartridges over CDs. I think it was the love of blowing into the bottom, you know? History shows this was a mistake. The PlayStation was a major success for Sony, selling more than 100 million units over the course of its life. The Nintendo 64, meanwhile, moved just over 30 million units. And if you need help on the math there, well, don't ask us, math is hard. The discrepancy between those numbers isn't completely due to the price and technical limitations of cartridges. Let's just say you're a third-party developer who wants to make a big game. If you could save a bunch of money and make a better-looking game by publishing it on a CD compared to a cartridge, which one would you choose? Yeah, we figured. Most game developers chose CDs. That's particularly why Nintendo lost the Final Fantasy series to the PlayStation, and why massive cinematic games like Metal Gear Solid didn't come out on Nintendo 64. Ignoring third-party developers. During the days of the NES and SNES, Nintendo had a great relationship with third-party developers, BFFs even. Many of the best Nintendo and Super Nintendo games were made by companies like Capcom, Tecmo, and Konami. Without third-party support, Nintendo fans wouldn't have gotten to play games like Castlevania or Street Fighter II. But after the SNES, Nintendo started making weirder hardware. Some of these hardware choices turned out to be great, like the analog stick on the N64 controller. Others were less great, like the Wii U's gamepad controller. But each oddball piece of hardware contributed to a growing distance between Nintendo and third-party game makers. As mentioned earlier, it really started with Nintendo's use of cartridges in the Nintendo 64. When third-party developers saw they could make bigger, better-looking games on CD-based systems, that's where they took their games. It makes a whole lot of sense. The trend continued with the GameCube, a system that used tiny discs instead of DVDs like the competition. And when the Wii and Wii U came out, each of them were underpowered and used gimmicky controls. By that point, many third-party developers simply gave up working with Nintendo. With the Switch, Nintendo seems to be turning this trend around and making nice with some of the third-party developers. But still, developers need to make concessions to get their games up and running on such unique hardware. It remains to be seen how much third-party support Nintendo can actually muster on the Switch. Not partnering with Sony. The history of video games might look quite different if Nintendo could go back to the mid-90s and change one big mistake. Maybe there's an alternate dimension somewhere where this happened. The mistake happened during the Nintendo era, when Nintendo and Sega were duking it out for video game dominance. To get a technological leg up, Nintendo partnered with Sony to build a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. This so-called SNES CD would play existing Super Nintendo games, but it would also play new games printed on compact discs. The project got far enough that Sony and Nintendo made numerous prototypes of the console, which would eventually be nicknamed the Nintendo PlayStation. Get it? But in exchange for developing the CD side of the machine, Sony wanted to maintain control over the new disc format it developed. Nintendo couldn't give up control over such a key component of the machine, so it backed out of the deal. As gamers know, Sony soon decided to get into the video game business without Nintendo's help. As time went on, most PlayStation consoles ended up outselling Nintendo's competing machines. Imagine what the gaming landscape would look like if only Nintendo had held on to Sony as a partner in the 90s. It would have been a vastly different industry, possibly with some other big hardware maker occupying Sony's current position. What company might it be? Possibilities include Apple, Sega, or Samsung, among others. Virtual Boy. Like the Wii U, Nintendo's Virtual Boy was a bungled attempt to create a new piece of gaming hardware. Unlike the Wii U, the Virtual Boy didn't hang around on the market for years after Nintendo fans rejected it. The Virtual Boy came out in 1995, but you'd be forgiven if you don't remember ever seeing it on a store shelf. Virtual Boy was essentially a headset, even though you couldn't strap it onto your head. Instead, you placed it on a stand and had to press your face up against it to play games. Kind of like those things at the eye doctor that puff air into your eyeball. On the plus side, Virtual Boy games were in 3D, but everything else about the console was a drawback. Unlike colorful systems like the Super Nintendo and PlayStation, the Virtual Boy could only display games in two colors, black and red. This fact, along with the sheer physical discomfort of smashing your face into a piece of plastic for hours on end, made it a tough sell for gamers at the time. I wonder why. All told, only 22 Virtual Boy games ever came out. Thanks to poor reviews from critics and near total disregard from gamers, Nintendo pulled the console from shelves just 7 months after its release. Just think of all the resources Nintendo poured into designing and manufacturing the Virtual Boy, only to see it fall flat on its face. Now that is a big mistake. Being bad at the internet. Nintendo has pioneered all kinds of innovative ideas over the years. Putting two screens on the Nintendo DS seemed like a crazy idea when it first came out, but that system went on to sell in droves. The Wii's motion controllers were inviting enough to encourage many non-gamers to play video games for the first time. So why has Nintendo continually failed when it comes to online connectivity? With console after console, they just keep mucking it up, requiring players to share unique friend codes for each game they want to play online with their buddies. It's not like this is a tough problem to solve either. For years and years, Sony and Microsoft had offered standard friends lists, which let you play your games online with any of your friends. It's uncomplicated, it's easy. But on all Nintendo consoles before the Switch, you had to individually add friends using unique codes for each game you play. Yeah, doesn't make much sense. It was a nightmare to keep track of who you were friends with in which games. The whole thing was messy enough that you might have thrown your Wii U out the window and bought a PS4 just to play online with ease. With the Switch, Nintendo has finally made some steps towards unifying your friends across your whole library of games, but surprise, surprise, it's still kind of clunky. Figure it out, Nintendo! Bad voice acting in Zelda Breath of the Wild. There's no doubt The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an incredible video game. It drops you in an enormous world and gives you an incredible amount of freedom to explore nearly every inch of it. It has forests, deserts, icy tundras, puzzles, and enemies galore. It's fantastic. On top of all that, it has an incredibly deep physics engine that lets Link climb just about any wall and use the elements to his advantage. It's an astonishing achievement in a dozen different ways. So, why, when someone has something to say in a cutscene, does the game suddenly sound like a middle school play?
The fate of Hyrule rests with you.
The voice acting isn't just bad, it's so awful it pulls you out of the otherwise brilliantly rendered game world. How much better would Breath of the Wild be if they just stuck with on-screen text for the entire game? Sure, players expect to hear video game characters talk nowadays, but text would just get the job done. Better yet, they could have hired voice actors who could read their lines without making players wince in embarrassment the moment they open their lips. Good thing TheGamer has such awesome voice actors, huh? Bad voice acting isn't enough to ruin a game, but it's one of the few marks against it. A game this ambitious and masterful deserves a talented cast of voice actors who can pull off the scenes and add to the immersion of the game. I'm ready, Nintendo. Have your people call my people. Power Glove. Nintendo has released many questionable peripherals over the years, but the Power Glove for the NES seems to have more promise than most. Shown off in the movie The Wizard, starring the lovable kid from the Wonder Years, the Power Glove looked like a cool, innovative way to control games like Super Mario Bros. 3 and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Yeah, we were fooled too. Kids convinced their parents to buy them the Power Gloves in droves. Once the little NES owners opened their new toys, they rushed to their consoles, plugged in their Power Gloves, and howled in frustration because the Power Glove was an unforgivably terrible controller. For starters, this thing was uncomfortable to wear. It was hot enough that you'd start sweating immediately once you began waving your hand in a futile attempt to move Mario or punch Piston Honda. The real problem was that it was completely unresponsive. In commercials, kids would control games flawlessly just by gesturing with their gloved hands. Ah, advertising. In reality, it took 20 tries to get your character to move a single pixel, let alone make any progress through levels that were retro-challenging. If nothing else, the Power Glove proved you couldn't trust commercials. Everyone who bought a Power Glove just lost a piece of their innocence when they tried it on and got steamrolled by the first enemy they encountered. Poor kids. Having Peach get kidnapped again in Odyssey. I'm not here to tell Nintendo how to make a game, but how many times has Bowser kidnapped Princess Peach again? 1, 2, 3, is it more than 100? Because it seems like it must be. Over the decades, Peach has spent more and more time imprisoned by Bowser than free in her own castle. Surely Nintendo's latest greatest Mario game on the Nintendo Switch tweaks the formula, right? Wrong. It starts out just the same as all the others, with Bowser flying off with Peach in tow. The only difference is, this time he's gonna forcibly marry her. Wow, that's terrifying. Isn't it time the writers at Nintendo put on their thinking caps and come up with some new ideas? Because rescuing the princess was the kind of low-hanging narrative fruit players expected in a video game when the first Mario came out in the 1980s. But in the world we live now, that plot is staler than a dry bones in a ghost house. Sure, no one plays a Mario game for the thrilling story. You play them because it's fun to jump into question blocks and stomp Goombas. It's also a blast to collect coins and moons. We don't really need a story at all, but if Nintendo insists on giving us one, can't they come up with something fresher than a tale that was already dull when we we first saw it 3 decades ago. Alright, now we're only tough on Nintendo because we love them. Tough love, baby. For all the company's mistakes, they've given us some of the very best video game hardware and software ever created. No one's perfect, not even the Mario Company. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Also be sure to subscribe to The Gamer and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our great video content. Thanks for watching.
Creating a video game is a massive operation with typically a large budget. Teams of people are employed to ensure absolutely nothing goes wrong, so when the game hits the market, there's nothing for fans to criticize or pick apart. Unfortunately, no matter how careful a developer is, mistakes still happen. Before we get into this video, be sure to subscribe to The Gamer and ring that bell to stay up to date with all things gaming. Here are 10 video game mistakes developers made without getting caught. Oblivion. Bethesda is a giant in the video game industry. As creators of 2 of the biggest titles in video games, it's safe to say their ventures are huge undertakings with large teams of professionals behind them. Does a large team protect them from making mistakes? Absolutely not! Also, this probably won't be the last mistake Bethesda makes. The Elder Scrolls franchise is definitely a fan favorite, and as fans of RPGs are aware, it's an in-depth, immersive fantasy world. Players routinely start and finish quests, unless you're like me and leave half your quests completely unfinished because, ooh, look, a place I haven't been to. Along the way, they find good loot and not so good loot. They discover new areas of the map and more lore than they care to know. Along with adventure comes a heaping helping of NPCs and NPC dialogue, bordering on monotonous monologue. Some may call this dialogue junk. Me? I call them treasure. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, every voiceover artist's worst nightmare for starters, and in case you're wondering, yes, I have had nightmares about this. In The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, one of the NPC's lines was flubbed in the first take, which in and of itself isn't too terrible, but someone on the development team forgot to remove the voiceover artist asking for a second take after the first take. To top it off, not only did they leave the request for a retake in-game, but they also included the second take of the line as well. Mafia 2. Open-world crime games have been popular since the first Grand Theft Auto title was released. Well, probably even earlier than that, but GTA is king and everyone knows it. In Mafia 2, players took control of Vito Scaletta, an up-and-coming gangster returning home from World War II on his way up through the criminal ranks in Empire Bay. There's nothing wrong with Vito from a character design standpoint anyway, but he does like to visit his mother, which is where this horrifying mistake comes into play. Yes, just an average visit home to mother can become a horrifying mistake if developers decided to do a half-baked job on their game. Vito's mother is just another run-of-the-mill mom on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC as players should expect. However, if players decided to play Mafia 2 on a MacBook and went to visit Vito's mother, they were in for a terrifying surprise. His mom looks, well, like some kind of skinned mannequin or poorly assembled robot a mad engineer simply forgot to complete or chose not to complete in order to terrify everyone around said robot. It's clear the developers did not have access to a MacBook, and if they did, they seriously shirked their responsibilities when it came to completing Vito's mother. Don't Mac and game, kids, unless you want nightmares. Dark Souls. Dark Souls is one of the most grueling games out there. As an action role-playing game, it's definitely not running short on atmosphere or enemies anytime soon. The world is immersive, and there are plenty of bosses to strike down any player's ego. The constant grind of looting and battles can feel pretty serious to players, as one wrong move can result in death. It's fair to say that this is one game where any errors could throw off the entire game. Of course, with an RPG comes an expansive, detailed environment. Players could assume, with such a large world, there are bound to be mistakes somewhere. Developers certainly can't catch everything in such a large in-game world, and of course, they didn't. This error, however, is just a simple mistake and certainly doesn't take away from the gameplay. It's just a little strange. Somewhere out in the Duke's archives floats a door. No, we're not joking about this. There is a random door just floating in the sky with no rhyme or reason. It seems like such a silly mistake to make in such a hardcore game like Dark Souls, where every location is ridiculously detailed. One player went to investigate the mysterious door to see if there was something more to it. Nope, it was just a lone door floating in the sky. Not even a really stupid mimic. Metal Gear. Metal Gear is a fairly popular action-adventure stealth game, so much so that it's become an entire franchise. Given the serious nature of the art of sneaking, one would assume the developers did everything in their power to assure that there was nothing to detract from the storyline. However, mistakes happen even when the game is intended to be a little more serious in its gameplay. Mistakes are especially bound to happen when it comes to translation. In fact, Metal Gear is not alone in this, as the ever-popular "all your base are belong to us" is yet another translation error yielding comedy gold. To give Metal Gear some credit, it's definitely not the worst translation fail to ever happen in a video game. Back to Metal Gear, the game itself had to undergo translation from Japanese to English. Of course, with every translation attempt, there will be some phrases which do not translate well for whatever reason, and it seems like developers don't always catch these bad translations. The most notable translation fail was the utterance, "I feel asleep." Maybe it's their way of saying this character feels sleepy. We're not sure, but it rolls off the tongue like a bag of bricks. One more gem from Metal Gear is the proclamation, "Uh-oh, the truck have started to move." Even Kojima himself hated the NES version. DayZ. Open-world survival games are a total blast to play, which is evident due to the popularity of games like Minecraft and 7 Days to Die. In DayZ, the goal is to survive the zombie apocalypse with minimal equipment at the start of the game, and over time gather the supplies to survive. Par for the course when it comes to survival games, other players can also pose a threat as well. If a player is under-equipped, they can easily fall prey to other players in-game, and no one wants that. Unfortunately for developers, there was a period of time where other players did not pose a threat at all, which resulted in some hilarious shenanigans for those players still in-game. In the past, when other players logged out of DayZ, their character would remain in-game, albeit they were a shell of a character which simply stood there and did pretty much nothing, but they were still there. Other players in-game could still see them, attempt to kill them, and ultimately fail to destroy these strange husks of humans. We have no idea why the developers didn't see this glaring error prior to release. Maybe it was easy to miss when only the development team was test playing the game. Either way, it seems to have been rectified now. GTA San Andreas. Everyone is familiar with Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which of course had local co-op. It was a fun addition to the GTA franchise, and players enjoyed the capability of playing with their friends in their own homes. Most of the time, playing in local co-op was a standard fare without much incident aside from the criminal element in-game. Unfortunately for host players, however, other players could pick up weapons and attack them, which is all in the spirit of the game, right up until things get weird. If a player opted to pick up a katana, they could choose to attack the host player in-game. Effectively chopping off their head would be all in good fun, as it's virtual, but it would end the co-op session. Clearly, if players can't play nice with one another, they can't be trusted to continue to game, so stopping the local co-op mode makes sense. However, this is where things get strange. The host player obviously would have lost their head after this encounter if their friend's aim with the katana was true. It's all a video game though, right? So things should go back to normal. Not so. The host player, as CJ, would continue on without a head. For how long? Well, forever if the player survived the game and made the mistake of saving it. Yes, players could continue to pull a Sleepy Hollow Headless Horseman around San Andreas for all eternity. Now how did that not make it in as an Easter egg in GTA 5? Skyrim. Of course, Bethesda landed on this list yet again, and for a very good reason. It's clear that they did not learn their lesson from the mistakes they made in Oblivion. To be clear, we're not talking about $2 horse armor, that's a whole other story. However, they did manage to make an entirely different mistake in Skyrim, so it probably counts for something, right? It would be downright embarrassing if they had the same voiceover mistake yet again. Just go listen to all of Esbern's responses and tell me he doesn't have two voice actors alternating. If a player wanders around Skyrim, as one does when they're in an open-world RPG, they're likely to run into a variety of strange characters. It's pretty much par for the course when it comes to RPGs, and most players are used to it by now. Unfortunately, there are no characters stranger than the land swimmers. No, this isn't a super secret Skyrim RPG class, it's just another random mistake courtesy of Bethesda. For some unknown reason, the developers didn't notice that some of their NPCs opt to swim around on land. Okay, so it's slightly above the actual land, but it's still weird to watch NPCs hovering above the ground while pretending to swim. In fact, they go as far as doggy paddling around in the air. Even worse, some of these NPCs will even tread water while floating next to players in-game. How Bethesda missed this glaring error is beyond us, but it does make the serious atmosphere of Skyrim just a little bit funnier. Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption, while a fun Western-themed game from Rockstar, endless horse riding aside, definitely had a handful of glitches and mistakes which were very noticeable to players. In fact, there were so many that it's difficult to pick just one. So which set of mistakes deserves the most attention? The ridiculously odd and often terrifying animal glitches. Yes, plural, as there were many of them, so we've lumped them all together to make things a little easier. Players would often find themselves wandering around only to run into several terrifying animal glitches. If an animal with a human's face wasn't creepy enough, players would also have to keep an eye out for coyotes armed with guns. Okay, so armed is a bit of a stretch. More like glitched out guns hovering near an animal, sometimes with a human face. Occasionally, it seemed as though humans and animals would swap places. It wouldn't be unheard of to ride a woman into town or watch a man fly through the sky like an eagle. Like a majestic eagle. Not enough nightmare fuel for you? How about running into a cougar with a man's face instead of a cougar's? We're not quite sure how Rockstar managed to miss so many mistakes when it came to their human and animal NPCs in Red Dead Redemption. Maybe they played through with their eyes closed. Hitman Blood Money. Hitman, the crime-based stealth game similar to the Grand Theft Auto series, was so popular that they made several titles over the years, with Blood Money being the fourth installment in the franchise. Now, players may think that in 4 games, the developers would have learned to avoid mistakes. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and this mistake was so glaringly obvious, it's since become a meme. While making mistakes is probably every developer's worst nightmare, at least this was comical enough to become a meme. Most players want to explore everything in-game down to the most mundane detail. That is me to a T. If a player, much like myself, were to observe a crate of lobster in Hitman Blood Money, however, they would find the description lacking. Quite literally lacking, actually. Instead, they would be treated to a note which read, "Alan, please add details." It seems as though Alan forgot to add said details to the crate of lobster. Good job, Alan. Employee of the year right here. To be completely fair, this is a simple misunderstanding. Maybe Alan did add the description for everything else, and for some reason the crate of lobster slipped under his otherwise attentive radar. How often should a developer check a box of lobsters anyway? In all reality, that's probably how this teeny tiny mistake slipped past so many team members in the first place. Super Mario Bros. Yes, even Nintendo makes mistakes from time to time. Virtual Boy, anyone? However, this mistake is beyond irritating, especially when in most Mario games, there are secret levels waiting to be found which don't punish players relentlessly. No one wants to stumble across a secret level and then desperately wish they hadn't. If players utilize the glitch in World 1-2, they could find a secret level, aptly named Minus World by Mario fans. To access the level, players would have to execute a jump on the pipe leading to the flag in World 1-2. They would then slide through the wall where a pipe awaits to take them to a secret level, but this secret level seems more like a punishment than a reward. The level itself is another water level, which isn't too terrible as far as water levels go. Players can complete the level as they normally would, however, once they've reached the end, things start to get frustrating. After going through the pipe at the end of the level, they're glitched back to the start of the secret level. Welcome to Mario Hell. The only foreseeable solution to this endless loop of a level is to manually restart the system and lose all progress leading up to that point if players hadn't saved before. Thanks, Nintendo. This is one secret level players will want to stay away from. So, have you found any other terrible mistakes in video games? Do you agree with this list? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to click the subscribe button so you can keep up with all of our videos. Thanks for watching.
We all remember when the original Xbox came out in 2001. For those who weren't yet with us, this was a glorious time. The Xbox was up against the PS2, the Nintendo GameCube, and the Sega Dreamcast. Competition was fierce, but it's safe to say the Xbox won this showdown. And many aspects unique to its business model later became the industry standard. As with many behemoths, pride came before the fall. And nowadays we're not so sure the Xbox can lay claim to the throne. So stick around as we vent our rage about 10 Xbox fails Microsoft wants you to forget. If you haven't already, subscribe and like this video to support the team. Online only. Okay, before we really dive into the list of Xbox fails, we need to air some beef immediately. You'll notice throughout this list there's tremendous pressure in the video game industry to isolate its gamers. Each gamer needs their own account, their own online subscription, their own this, their own that. Bottom line, most games today require far more cash than the initial outlay. $60 for the game plus $400 for the console all in to play a video game seems reasonable, you may think. Well, you know nothing, Jon Snow. And this is why we're kicking off this list with Microsoft's feeble attempt to make the Xbox One online only. Oh yeah, they tried to make the Xbox One online only, meaning the Xbox, your $400 purchase, would be worthless unless it was connected to the internet all the time. That means you need to be signed into your Xbox Live account all the time. Outrageous. We could hardly believe it at the time. Luckily, the backlash was so fierce, and rightly so, Microsoft cowered and permitted the Xbox hardware to run offline. Just thinking about this still makes our blood boil because we know they will eventually have their way. We get it, you want our money. Does it have to be so slap in the face obvious? Pistol packing power. Let's get over to some games. As easy as it is to really tear into Microsoft, let's give them a little credit for Halo. That's the first Halo on the first generation Xbox. This combo was iconic. The success alone launched a massive merchandising campaign as well as several web series spin-offs, not to mention the film that sadly never made it to production. In addition, the draw was massive. If you were one of the unlucky few who gambled on the PS2 after having decided between the two, you probably had buyer's remorse, the likes of which we've never seen. Halo alone was worth the console purchase. And here's where we get to the pistol. We wonder how many of you remember using the pistol as your primary weapon. Halo was all about shot placement, regardless of distance. The bullets traveled like lasers, and so the lowly pistol became a weapon of dominance. Used for long-distance headshots and even up-close battles, the Halo pistol was truly one of the most unintentionally powerful weapons in the game, until they changed it. Yeah, this pistol was so powerful players would dominate with it, so much so that Xbox reduced the power in later Halo games to re-establish a more fitting place on the hierarchy of weaponry. Red Ring of Death. Oh yeah, this one. So far we've been using the word Xbox to refer to all iterations of the Xbox, but this one is just for the Xbox 360. Probably one of the biggest problems to affect the Xbox, sort of like a car recall, was the dreaded Red Ring of Death. Although lots of players were lucky enough to encounter this issue within their warranty period, many were not. Basically, it's just death. Your Xbox just dies with little to no warning. It was a huge fail because we all like to be mindful of our money, but with the Red Ring of Death, nothing says wasted money like a $400 piece of trash. To top it all off, this case was never formally solved either. It's a problem stemming from a variety of reasons. Many people speculated about the origins of this issue, and we're sure some may have cured their Xbox, but honestly, who knows? Did you ever attempt the penny trick as a last resort? Let us know in the comment section. Since we're thinking about it, this may have been a problem Microsoft simply brushed under the rug. We know Xboxes don't have a red ring anymore, so it makes us wonder. The original controller. Who doesn't remember playing Halo when it first came out with the original Xbox controller? We certainly remember. It was very, how can we say, different. And by different, we mean huge. As in freakishly huge. Especially in the center where there's this large bulbous Xbox logo, which is exactly what you'd want according to Microsoft in 2001, a giant Xbox logo in the middle of prime controller real estate. The controller was a surprising step backwards. We were blown away by the Nintendo 64 controller, and given this controller was released 5 years earlier, it seemed like a no-brainer the Xbox controller would be equally mind-blowing. It was not. How wrong we were. It wasn't game-changing at all. In fact, shortly after releasing the product into the wild, it was replaced by the S controller we know today. While the controller did take some getting used to, it was more than playable in the end. It wasn't bad by any means, but it was a total letdown. In the end, we would have liked to see the Xbox launch with a controller more like the N64 or the S controller, not the Dreamcast. Who knows though? This thing will probably end up as a collector's item soon enough. Smart glass. Alright, we have to come clean here. We've been researching the Xbox Smart Glass, and this thing was such a massive fail, we still have no idea what it's for. Don't get us wrong, we understand the idea. It allows users to connect their smartphone, tablet, and Xbox together, so that players can receive specific content on those devices. In theory, sounds great. It certainly sounds like a more immersive game-playing experience. We're picking up a Minority Report style vibe combined with just regular 21st century technology, all in the comfort of our basements. Sounds great. How could this possibly go wrong? Well, it was pretty obvious actually. Smartphone operating systems are the worst. Plain and simple, fragmentation is rife. How could they ever expect to have the correct interface for the correct mobile device with the correct software version? Pretty much impossible. Secondly, they launched the Smart Glass on the Xbox 360 in 2012. Ambitious considering we can't really do it well even in 2017. And lastly, it was simply impractical. Using a phone and a TV in a larger Nintendo 3DS way? Maybe, but customers said no thanks. At first, we questioned how these decision makers got their jobs, but then we realized, who cares? It was a hilarious waste of money, nothing more. Xbox KINECT. This should probably be number one because it still brings a chuckle to our faces. We get it, the Kinect was released near the time of the Wii, offering similar motion controlled abilities, but it wasn't the best effort. Although the Wii did very well, selling over 100 million units despite being a novelty purchase for many, it never penetrated the serious gaming market that is the Xbox customer. We're guessing some of our readers remember the activator for the Sega Genesis on Mortal Kombat. There's only so many times I can do a flying kick, and you'd think Xbox would have picked up on this obvious fact. In addition, besides the awful spelling, Microsoft got a little too creepy. Though they tried, there was no sugarcoating the fact that your Kinect was always on, always listening. Many users had difficulty accepting this. Basically, the Kinect was just a recording device for $100. And in this age of sharing location data, you can never be sure. Lastly, let's not forget the strange capabilities of the Kinect camera itself. Not only can it record your movements in total darkness, it also seems to be picking up strange entities from beyond the grave. Yeah, many users are catching ghosts on their Kinect. Who would have thought? Xbox One launch. Somebody probably got fired over this. Do you remember the Xbox One launch? We certainly do because it was a total abomination. When the Xbox One initially launched, it was bundled with the Kinect. There was no other way to purchase the Xbox One other than with the Kinect. So if you wanted the Xbox One, you had to purchase this creepy recording device as well. If this setback wasn't enough, the Xbox One was priced $100 higher than the PS4, because apparently it's important we pay for things we don't want. Because of these factors, many people purchased the PS4 over the Xbox One, and Microsoft lost tremendous amounts of money in the initial sales. Given that the PS4 was the underdog, Sony made a strong push for sales, and quite frankly, by not being creepy, they were able to teach Microsoft a lesson. Shortly after the losses became too much, Microsoft relaunched the Xbox One without the Kinect for $100 less, and sales came roaring back. Looking back at this scenario, the consumers really stepped up in a big way. This example is a great illustration of consumers voting with their dollars. If something's not right, don't buy it. They'll be forced to listen sooner or later. Updates. If you've purchased an Xbox One or PS4, you know all too well about this massive fail. And it's ongoing. Yep, we're talking about installation and update waiting times. And nowhere in sight is there a solution. Has Microsoft ever even acknowledged this fact? If there was a fail Xbox wishes you'd forget most, it would definitely be this one. Gone are the days of buying a video game and playing it immediately. Gone are the days of instant gratification. Nowadays, when you put a disc in, you can expect to not play for the next several hours. Those lengthy, hours-long installation and update times are so brutal, it's laughably ridiculous. We've heard horror stories about some installation times that in combination with updates have gone on for over 12 hours. In fairness, it partly depends on your internet connection though. When thinking about this issue, it was never a problem with the original Xbox. So we have to ask, has graphic technology really outgrown the development of CPU technology? External HD DVD player. Oh yeah, we forgot about this one completely. This is another example of corporate greediness getting a taste of what it deserves. If you were one of those who bought the Xbox 360, we bet you were surprised when you found out the DVD player was actually incapable of playing HD DVDs. Even though this console set you back far more than any HD DVD player available at the time, you still had to buy their peripheral in order to watch HD movies. Simply infuriating. We bet most people were surprised by this one because they would have assumed, of course, that their latest purchase supports the latest technology. Wrong. We know HD DVDs were all the rage at the time, and Microsoft surely must have thought people would be lining up to fork over $200 for an external HD DVD player. But they were wrong. We remember this, and we remember thinking, what a slap in the face. Well, if you were hoping for some justice, Sony had your back. Luckily, their competing console had Blu-ray standard, and that may have actually led to the eventual dominance of Blu-ray over HD. Everything's for sale. For the devoted Xbox livers, this one's for you. Does it seem like over the years the Xbox has become increasingly aggressive in demanding money for features that should otherwise be free? It started off with the servers. At the time, PlayStation and Xbox were pioneering online multiplayer. And while the PlayStation was free, the Xbox cost money. Sure, the money went to purchase dedicated servers, but is this really the case anymore? Now it's the industry standard, so we can expect online multiplayer to always cost money moving forward. Focusing on the hardware, we've seen Xbox intentionally restrict features such as the arcade Xbox 360 bundle to the point where it's unplayable, literally, or where they unnecessarily burden the product with undesirable features like the KINECT. Forcing you to purchase peripherals you otherwise wouldn't isn't good business. Add on map packs, in-game purchases, rising costs for Xbox Live, and we have to ask, when will the Xbox return to gaming's roots? You know, when it was about getting together with your buddies and playing GoldenEye 007 on the N64 until 4 AM? We miss those days. We know we could go on all day about Microsoft fails, but which one do you think was the most egregious? Be sure to let us know in the comment section. Give this video a big thumbs up and be sure to click the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all our videos. Thanks for watching.
America has been blessed with some great consoles, including the original NES, the Sega Genesis, and the Sony PlayStation. Ah, nostalgia. Then there's all the generations of consoles which followed. Between these huge debuts, other countries, like Japan, got their hands on a slew of consoles never released in the United States. Check out some of the hits, the duds, and the revolution which led to our favorite consoles ever. Before you watch, click subscribe. You'll join our notification squad and be the first to know of new content. Without further ado, here are 8 game consoles that never made it to America. Nintendo Color TV Game 6. Nintendo's introduction to the home console market was a far cry from the Nintendo Entertainment System we know and love. In 1977, the Nintendo Color TV Game 6 was released in Japan. Yes, that's the real name. There was no Mario, no Duck Hunt, and none of the classic rectangular controllers that were just as iconic as the console itself. The home console system played much like an Atari. It was packaged with 2 connected knobs on each side and the power options on the console itself. The orange design scheme looked like a partnership with Nickelodeon, but a white version of the console was also released. While the Nintendo Color TV Game 6 is an important part of Nintendo history, don't expect to see the Classic Edition get released anytime soon. The console only had one game, the straightforward title Light Tennis. It was a simpler time in 1977. Basically a colorized version of Pong. Players would move their paddles on the side to hit the ball across to try and defeat their opponent. Seems simple, right? Nintendo tried to make the game seem a little deeper than it was. They added different versions of the game, including multiple obstacles appearing in the center of the board. No matter how fancy you try to make it, Pong is Pong. Nintendo was likely testing the market as graphics improved and the future of the Nintendo console division was just taking form. An upgraded version known as the Color TV Game 15 featured better joystick controls and a number of different games to choose from. The success of these consoles helped form the NES we know and love today. CASIO Loopy. The developers at Casio were trying to find a way to cater a gaming console exclusively towards girls. Their solution? A purple console with hearts on it. Cause of course, that's what girls like, right? Even though they were going for a specific audience with cliché designs, the Casio Loopy console had some positive attributes when it was first released in Japan back in 1995. The late release date of the Casio Loopy made it feel outdated already. Still, the console had something we never knew we wanted on a gaming device, a sticker printer. The thermal sticker printer could be used with games and even print out screenshots from VCRs or DVD players. The sticker printer itself was probably better than any of the gaming elements featured on the Loopy. After investing so much money into the Loopy, gamers were probably surprised to find out there were only 10 games released for the console. Some versions came packaged with Anime Land. The game allows players to create their own anime characters with a number of custom settings. A majority of the other games were storyline-based dating games, because girls. The non-action titles were played using a controller featuring 4 buttons and a D-pad. Oddly, the Loopy creators must have thought girls only played games alone, because the console was packaged with just one single controller port. Oh, that's lonely. The low library of games and release date of the console forced sales to deplete in Japan, and the console was never popular enough for Casio to ever consider the United States. But how am I gonna print off my stickers? Bandai PLAYDIA. Ugh, no kid wants some knockoff educational console. But this is what Bandai tried pushing in the form of the PLAYDIA. Learning while playing video games, ew. Right out of the gate, players could tell this Japanese release was catered to the very young children. The bright blue console, designed with pops of yellow, looked like a rainbow explosion and screams kindergarten all over it. Released in 1995, the console ran on CD-ROMs, but doesn't play games like you're used to. Most of the content for the PLAYDIA felt like an interactive movie. Players wouldn't control characters, they would play through a digital choose-your-own adventure, making different choices and decisions based on the actions on screen. In other words, things got boring pretty quick. There were a number of Dragon Ball Z games released, but nothing worthwhile, even if you were a die-hard fan of the series. A large amount of games featured the Japanese cult hero known as Ultraman. This consisted of different adventures, stories, and action-based titles. One of the main highlights was the controller. The PLAYDIA controller was wireless, with a similar design to the original Wii controller. The directional buttons also acted as media navigation, and 2 input buttons were used for action. The wireless device communicated using infrared rays, much like a television remote. This meant the reaction time wasn't as fast as it should be, but the whole wireless aspect is appealing to a lot of gamers. Ahead of its time, really. Unfortunately, the console only supported 1 controller, eliminating any possibility of a multiplayer game. When children were done playing, which probably took all of 5 minutes, the console features a built-in slot for the controller, so it doesn't get lost. Too bad for Bandai, the only thing lost was any type of profit. Heyo, buzzing! AMSTRAD GX4000. Don't count the Brits out yet. After years of console dominance from countries like Japan, Britain decided to join in on the console wars with the release of the AMSTRAD GX4000. And this is why everyone is still playing the AMSTRAD today. Wait, they're not playing it? Oh, it was a huge failure? Yeah, okay. Let's rewind for a second. Released in 1990, the AMSTRAD GX4000 was off store shelves by 1991. The blink and you'll miss it console release failed for many reasons. The look of the console felt like an imitation of the NES. It featured all dull gray design and had nothing to make it stand out, and felt like it could smash into pieces with just one fall off the entertainment center. Oh no, my console is broken. The console itself relied on playing computer game releases. These European releases were much cheaper to get for a computer, and players had no reason to shell out hundreds of dollars for this worse-off version. Oh, it was a rip-off, it was. The game selection wasn't bad. It included the side-scrolling RoboCop 2 and a few pretty good racing games. It was just impossible to enjoy them because of the cheap controller. Lightweight, stiff, and noisy, the GX4000 controller was pretty much a piece of garbage. It looked like a third-party Nintendo controller ripoff, but was the main controller for the console. Another problem players dealt with was the AC adapter the console came with. If the adapter wasn't plugged in a specific order, it could instantly short the system and possibly cause a fire. What are you trying to do to us, Britain? A small console fire was probably more entertaining than anything else the GX4000 had to offer, though. Nevertheless, errors like this typically meant doom for a console anyway. One of the more mind-boggling parts of the GX4000 was the pause button. Instead of being featured on the controller, a giant pause button was attached to the console. This meant players had to get up just to pause the game. Maybe it's an exercise thing, I don't know. The huge design flaw was a mess and the console quietly drifted away, but not on a ship to the United States. Yes, you can keep this console to yourself, Britain, thank you. Fujitsu FM Towns MARTY. Years before the PlayStation or Sega Saturn, Japanese gamers got their hands on a CD-ROM console known as the Fujitsu FM Towns MARTY. I'm sorry, what? That's actually what it's called, okay. The fast little console with a not-so-catchy name was actually pretty impressive for its time, but never caught on fully due to the high price tag. Originally released in 1989 at the retail price of $700, which is pretty much like $1 billion now, the console featured a lot of industry standards which took years to adapt to. The FM Towns MARTY, seriously what a terrible console name, featured 32-bit graphics, and was the first home console to do so. It played a lot like a PC, and the game library was pretty extensive due to the ability to play computer games. The controller itself only features a 2-button mechanism, but it was enough for most of the games at the time. PC games like Monkey Island 2 and Indiana Jones and The Fate of Atlantis could be played on the console with smooth graphics and great gameplay. A small SARM card slot acted as a memory card so players could save progress within the various games they played. The SRAM was a huge upgrade and saved players from losing progress and starting all over. In the days before hard drives were the norm, this was a huge plus. Remember when 8 megabytes felt like a lot? When you weren't playing games, the CD-ROM drive also acted like an audio CD player and could play all types of music through your television. A microphone jack even allowed you to sing along with your favorite songs. Karaoke CDs were released for the system, but never really took off, much like the games. Years later, the Sony PlayStation would have a number of the same features, but offered better graphics. The FM Towns MARTY showcased the future of consoles at the time, but a name sounding like a local radio station and a lack of interest caused the console to ultimately fail. The whole American gaming industry could be a lot different if this console was released here. NEC PC FX. Years before we were purchasing vertical stands for the PS4 and Xbox One, the NEC PC FX knew what we wanted in the form of a console style. First released in 1994, the console was designed a lot like a PC, using the tower design and giving gamers room for upgrades. The PC FX featured upgrade slots for extra memory, space, and features, but the console was not out long enough to provide any of them. One of the major mistakes with the system was the decision to stick with only 2D graphics. The PC FX was capable of doing 3D, but NEC decided to focus on providing only the best 2D graphics possible. The baffling decision led to games with good graphics, but designs which already felt outdated when compared to the other systems at the time. The system had a top-loading CD-ROM, which could also play all types of other media, including anime and, oddly enough, Kodak Picture CD-ROMs. The controller design was fairly nice, sporting 6 input buttons and smooth D-pad controls. In total, the NEC PC FX had a weak library of 62 games. Many of these games were strange puzzle games that lacked a lot of depth to them. They were boring after being played a few times, and the power of the PC-style console was wasted on these simple titles that could easily be played on other devices and often for free. Other game options included a variety of fighting games and some side-scrolling adventures. A majority of the games were designed in an anime style. Cutscenes featured real anime, but it was one of the few highlights and not enough to win gamers over. The release of the NEC PC FX came when gamers were getting introduced to the world of 3D. Despite the power behind the system, it instantly felt outdated and failed to catch on like it could have. This left the NEC PC FX as a Japan exclusive, likely racking up a lot of dust on store shelves. Sega SG-1000. Before Sega could flaunt their success with Sonic the Hedgehog, they were busy working on the console side of things first. The very first console Sega ever released was the Sega SG-1000. It didn't have quite the same flow as the Genesis or Master System, but the console itself was a pretty good option back in 1983. Much like the consoles following it, the SG-1000 was cartridge-based, and a number of different games were released. Before the classic black ABC controller was created, the SG-1000 used a joystick controller with 2 buttons located on the side. The Sega logo we still know and love today is located front and center on the console, right in front of the cartridge port. Ah, branding at its best. Despite the success of the SG-1000, the Japanese console never got a release in America. It could have been a hit here thanks to the large game library it boasted. A number of sports titles like Champion Soccer, Champion Ice Hockey, Champion Billiards, and Champion Pro Wrestling were fun for their simple concepts. If you wanted to be a champion, there was also a number of fast-paced action titles like the Black Onyx and Pitfall 2. By the time the Sega Master System came out, it was backwards compatible with the SG-1000, making the console all but obsolete. Then we were met with the little blue hedgehog, and hey, the rest was history. Bandai WonderSwan. When it came to portable gaming systems in America, no one could really touch Nintendo's success. Sega tried with the Game Gear, but the Game Boy prevailed, and this is probably one of the main reasons we never got our hands on the Bandai WonderSwan. Released in 1999, the WonderSwan handheld featured similar graphics to the original Game Boy and was actually designed by the original Game Boy designer. The handheld console had a couple of features which helped it stand out against the dominant competition. One of these features was the ability to play games both vertically and horizontally. Ooh. An extra control pad was placed in the top left corner of the console, completely changing the way developers could design games. It's almost like how phones and tablets can rotate positions today, so accommodate different types of games. Another huge highlight with the system was the ability to operate using just one AA battery. Now there's a plus. Battery power was always a pain with portable systems, but replacing a single battery is fairly easy. This was a huge selling point for the WonderSwan and something fans were drawn to when looking for cheap portable gaming. The WonderSwan found success early on and eventually released a color version of the console. The only problem with continuing the success was the release of the Game Boy Advance. The graphics and power blew the WonderSwan out of the water and was a big reason for its demise. Damn you, Nintendo! Well, there you have it. Which console do you wish you could try? Are there any we missed? What's your favorite console of all time? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to TheGamer on YouTube so you can stay up to date with all our awesome videos.
Sony has done a lot of great things over the years with the PlayStation. There have been genre-defining hits, great franchises, and systems people still remember fondly. However, for every great achievement, there's been an embarrassing failure. And boy, does PlayStation have a lot of those. This is what we're counting down today. These are 10 of the biggest PlayStation fails Sony wants you to forget. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can keep up to date with all the latest videos on the games you love. The 6-axis snafu. Motion controls were all the rage back then. A few console generations ago, everyone was blown away by the Wii's revolutionary motion control design. Sony was developing something similar with motion controls for their new PS3 controllers. Well, they didn't work as well as the Wii's tight and responsive motion controls. 6-axis was buggy and imprecise, and worse yet, developers had no idea what to do with these controls. The original Uncharted game tried to utilize the motion controls by mapping a flick command to throw grenades or balance when walking across ledges, but it didn't pan out. What made all of this even worse was the fact that Sony tried to sell this feature at the expense of having a rumble feature. They claimed the rumble would interfere with the motion controls, but gamers saw right through that. They looked at the Wii, which seemed to handle both motion controls and rumble features, so gamers didn't believe Sony for a second. The 6-axis feature was largely ignored, and a similar, more improved controller would not come out until the PS4's DualShock, so PlayStation gamers could finally have competent motion controls and rumble features. The PS Vita. So here's a neat little experiment you can do. Next time you're out and about, count the number of kids you see playing with PS Vitas. Then compare that to the amount of PS Vita games you find at your local game store. What does this prove? It proves no one plays with a PS Vita, and it's kind of Sony's fault. On paper, the PS Vita looks like a great piece of tech, and it only makes sense that there would be a successor to the PSP. However, the PSP was a success despite Sony's efforts, not because of them. By and large, Sony didn't market the PSP to American audiences as hard as it did to the native Japanese markets. Because of this, the PS Vita lives in relative obscurity in North America. The lack of first-party games didn't help the launch of the PS Vita either, as most of the games available at the time were very lackluster. Consider also the horrible memory card system. Instead of using SD cards like most systems, Sony sold specialized PS Vita memory cards that you had to buy separately, and as you might have guessed, they were not cheap. These issues, coupled with Sony's large indifference to selling handhelds, led to the PS Vita being largely ignored by gamers. The iToy. We all like to bag on Xbox Kinect for being a gimmicky product. It never worked the way it was advertised, none of the games for it were good, and the fact that it was always on when plugged in scared the crap out of us. Of course, many gamers forgot about the predecessor to the Kinect, the PlayStation iToy. If you want to talk about cheap, gimmicky products for game consoles, look no further. People often overlook the iToy because of its short shelf life and lack of support. The best modern-day comparison to the iToy would be an Instagram augmented reality feature. It was cheap, fun, and not really well developed. It came to a point where Sony themselves admitted they had no long-term plans for the iToy, admitting to what players had been saying for years: they need buttons. Whether it's a mouse and keyboard or a controller, the player needs to have some sort of input for the game they're playing. If you have them waving their arms around wildly, they have no feedback on what they're doing, and it can be a complete disconnect from the game. Thankfully, we found a great middle ground with the emerging VR systems that are out now. PlayStation Move. You know how the old saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Except maybe don't. We talked about how the PS3's motion control system was dead on arrival due to developers not using it and the system itself being unreliable. Well, Sony wasn't going to give up on the idea of motion control. They took a page out of Nintendo's book and decided to model controllers after the iconic Wiimotes, and the result was the PlayStation Move. These black wands with glowing balls on the end seemed to function similarly to the Wiimotes, but there was one major problem. Sony had missed the boat. The year was 2010 and people were beginning to see motion controls as a trend, a dying one at that, and as a result they moved on. Nintendo would move on to the Wii U, which moved away from motion controls and favored traditional gameplay. Sony was left with these odd-looking wands with next to no appeal or support. There is hope though. The Move controllers are compatible with PlayStation VR, so there might be a chance to redeem the Move. Let's hope that the Move isn't a 2x failure and gamers can at least get their money's worth. The PS3 wireless keyboard. Typing on a controller sucks. We'll never understand why game developers think it's a good idea for players to manually type out a message using the on-screen keyboard. Even entering in a player name can be a tedious task using a controller. So the natural answer to this was to release an attachable wireless keyboard that would allow players to text comfortably just like a cell phone. Because hey, texting was a thing back in the PS3 era. For all intents and purposes, it made sense to combine the two. The thing is, it only works well sometimes. The PS3 had an attachment much like the Xbox 360, but there was just one problem. It was in the wrong place. You see, unlike the Xbox attachment which locked in on the bottom of the controller for easy access, the PS3's locked on top near the shoulder buttons. You either needed to adjust your grip or have freakishly long thumbs to utilize the PS3 attachment effectively. Even more, it didn't hook into the controller. It was attached via a clamp that locked on top. So although it didn't draw power from the controller, it wasn't always the most secure or reliable piece of tech. Thankfully, we've all moved on from this attachment and use voice chat or the Messages app on our phones. PlayStation Home. In the mid to late 2000s, social media platforms were just getting their start, so everyone was trying to get on the bandwagon. Facebook was just beginning to pick up steam. Twitter was an almost unheard of concept. Instagram was a new place for pictures of food. PlayStation was no exception when they launched PlayStation Home in 2008. Home was meant to be a 3D social media game much like Half-Life was. The idea seemed fine enough, but pretty soon there were some cracks. First of all, having players pay real-life money for what was essentially useless cosmetics and furniture for their virtual home didn't sit well with the main audience. Beyond microtransactions, the program itself never left beta. It came out in 2008, but it didn't get past the second stage in development and stayed in perpetual beta until it was canned in 2015. Players also complained about the buggy interface and lack of any real options. Aside from personalizing your own avatar, their apartment, and a public hub for you and your friends, there just wasn't a whole lot to do in the world of PlayStation Home. Now consoles have largely abandoned large social media platforms with the exception of Nintendo. They still use the Me avatars for a lot of their games. Layer. Okay, this will be the last time we mention motion controls on this list, but I think it's time we bring all of these issues together and give you some context. When we said the 6-axis was an unusable, trashy mechanic that developers didn't know how to use, we neglected to mention Layer. What is Layer? Well, it was a game where you play as a knight who rides a dragon. Okay, we're already hooked. This was promised to be one of the flagship franchises of the PlayStation, but there was just one small problem. For the first run of the game, you could only play using motion control. So instead of using the tried and true analog controls, the player had to awkwardly twist and turn their controllers and try to control their dragon. Although the game was quickly patched so players could use their analog sticks, it wasn't the default, and by the time the patch was made aware of, it was already too late. The game never really took off, and to this day, people mostly point to it as a reminder of how fundamentally broken the motion controls were. Of course, with the advent of VR, now would be a good time to revitalize Layer. $5.99. That's all we really need to say, really. Any veteran gamer will remember before the launch of the PS3, Sony announced that it would be set at a whopping $499 and $599 price tag. Keep in mind that before this, they were coming off the success of the PlayStation 2, which for all intents and purposes was the king of that generation's console wars. Needless to say, people were shocked. For $499, gamers got a 20GB PS3, and for $100 more, they could get a 60GB one. The cheaper PS3 also lacked several features the more expensive one had. At the time, Sony was going to sell their newest system $200 and $300 higher than their PS2. It was also about $100 more expensive than Microsoft's Xbox 360. Maybe Sony thought they could get away away with making the price so high, but it clearly didn't last long. As most of you will remember, the price for the PS3 was soon slashed following the release. Although many people would think that this high price tag would deter buyers, Sony made a killing come holiday season when the console dropped. Today we remember that time very well and often ask ourselves, how could we even think of dropping $600 for a PS3? E3 2006. E3 is arguably the biggest gaming conference of the summer. Although today there are more gaming conferences, back in the day it was all about E3. During this time, new consoles were announced, game trailers were dropped, and tech demos were aplenty. However, in summer of 2006, Sony had a very special press conference. We just talked about the absurd $599 price tag, but this goes beyond that. During the press conference, Sony would go on to make the stuff of legend. Game demos were either missing or not good. Demonstrations for the PlayStation controller were nothing short of a disaster. The entire conference was topped by a now legendary moment known only as the Giant Enemy Crab. For those unaware, the Giant Enemy Crab refers to an enemy in the game Genji Days of the Blade. During the demo, a spokesperson from Sony talked about how the game was based on the real historical battles of ancient Japan. And just as he said that, a giant crab appeared on the screen as an enemy. The moment has been turned into a meme ever since, as the entire conference became a cautionary tale filled with what not to do at a video game conference. The PSN hack. Oh boy, this is the big one. The entries before covered hardware flops as well as PR and marketing failures, but this was a serious issue. About 6 years ago, the PlayStation Network was hacked, and the personal data of 77 million users was leaked and/or compromised. This was the largest attack of its kind in the history of console gaming, and to say it had repercussions is an understatement. Anonymous, the large hacktivist group, took credit for the hack, and leading up to the break had attacked PSN servers relentlessly, crippling the online service for days. The reason for all this? Anonymous didn't agree with the legal action Sony took against George GeoShot Hotz. He had released information on how to run pirated games and homebrewed software on the PlayStation systems. To Anonymous, the fact that Sony would take action against Hotz for bringing this information to the public needed to be answered with swift action, and so they attacked. Anonymous attacked twice in 2011, which caused irreparable damage to Sony and the consumer's trust in said company. The story's far too big to keep into just one piece in this video, so we provided a link to the full story in the description. And those were some of Sony's most embarrassing PlayStation fails. Did you know of any PlayStation fails we might have missed? If so, let us know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to The Gamer for more engaging videos on the games you love.
Anyone can make mistakes, including video game developers. In spite of throwing millions of dollars into developing a video game, accidents are inevitable. However, sometimes these mistakes and glitches actually end up improving the overall gameplay. Before we get into this video, be sure to subscribe to The Gamer and ring the bell to stay up to date with all things gaming. Here are 5 video game glitches that became features. Number 1. Grand Theft Auto. Way back in 1995, developers at DMA Design were working on a top-down driving game titled Race and Chase. The entire premise of the game was for players to complete missions either as a cop or criminal, but things weren't going well for the developers. A glitch in the game caused the AI police officers to go full T-1000 on players. AI police chasing down criminal characters at any cost, including attempting to wreck the player's car, was not exactly what they had intended for their title. Fortunately, the developers thought the relentless pursuit was more fun than their original plan. Redesigning the game so that players could only take on the role of a criminal vastly changed their game. But after some mergers and buyouts, DMA Design became Rockstar North, and the world was introduced to the first Grand Theft Auto title in 1997. Ah, crap. The Doomsday Heist is available in GTA 5 now, isn't it? I gotta farm friggin' $15 million after this, Number 2. Super Mario Bros. The Mario Brothers franchise is a staple of gaming pop culture. The plucky plumber is well known for his catchphrases and game mechanics. Nintendo keeps pushing new Mario titles, and gamers continue buying them, even though they're already well aware of the plot by now. The tale of the princess stealing Turtle King is older than time itself at this point. Bring back Wart! Yeah, that's right, you heard me. Make it all a dream again, I don't care. No Mario game would be complete without Mario's jumping ability. Mario's jump is completely necessary in order to move the plot ahead. Players can't save Princess Peach if they can't stomp a Goomba, but there was a time when wall jumping was not a standard feature in Mario games. Originally, Mario's wall jumping ability was merely a glitch, exploited by clever gamers that noticed that Mario could jump higher if he landed just right and utilized the wall. Thankfully, Nintendo saw just how popular the wall jump was and turned their glitch into a feature for Super Mario 64. Number 3. Street Fighter 2. Combos in the Street Fighter franchise are part of the game's appeal. Skilled players can manipulate their moves and pull out a combo with ease, annihilating their enemies in a complex move. It's difficult to imagine the Street Fighter franchise without combos. Noritaka Funamitsu, a producer on Street Fighter 2, was testing the game for bugs when he came across an unusual glitch. He found that players could essentially cancel moves by executing a different attack. This allowed players to pull off multiple moves in succession, allowing players to beat their opponents to a pulp. Funamitsu decided to leave this glitch in the game since he figured that there was no way players would be capable of pulling off such a complex set of maneuvers. Thankfully, he was wrong, and gamers can now enjoy as many combos as they can pull off in any Street Fighter title, and then promptly toss their controllers at their buddy's head when they get beaten because their friends are cheap and I'm not a sore loser, shut up, Nick. Number 4. Minecraft. Minecraft has become one of the most popular sandbox games in the world. While the main goal in-game is to defeat the Ender Dragon, countless players have spent time building and crafting their worlds. The blocky style of the Minecraft universe is now iconic, as are other aspects of the game. What would Minecraft be without its most recognizable mob, the Creeper? Well, Minecraft nearly existed without the presence of creepers, but thanks to an error in programming, players can still have their homes blown to bits by creepers. Woohoo! Hooray! Do I not sound excited? That's because my house was just blown up by a creeper. Marcus Persson originally set out to create a pig in Minecraft. Since he didn't have access to a modeling program, he opted to create a pig with code. Somewhere along the line, he accidentally fudged his numbers, creating a tall pig monstrosity. Seeing an opportunity, he turned the pig green and turned it into the creepers we know today. Number 5. The Code. Most game developers have a debug mode for their games so that they can test their games and check for mistakes. No developer wants to release a bug-filled game simply because they didn't bother to double-check their work before release. Typically, developers will disable debug mode prior to release, but not always. Kazuhisa Hashimoto, a developer on the game Gradius, thought that the game was too hard. In order to debug Gradius, he created a cheat code for himself to bypass the difficulty of the game and give him full power-ups. Fortunately for players, he forgot to remove the code prior to release. A few clever gamers figured out the code and word soon spread to other players, causing the code to become a pop culture reference which even appeared in other game titles. Thanks for gifting the world with the famous Konami code, Hashimoto. Still not gonna use it to find the end in MGS3 though. So anticlimactic. So what video game glitches have you discovered? Were they a feature that improved the game or just an irritating glitch? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to click that subscribe button so you can keep up with all of our videos. Thanks for watching. The Super Nintendo, Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Wii. Those are just a few of the successes from Nintendo. But despite all of the good, there have been some massive failures from the company through the years. Here are 10 fails Nintendo wants to sweep under the rug and wish you never knew about. Before you watch, click subscribe. You'll join our notification squad and be the first to know of new content. The Sony PlayStation is born. In today's video game market, Nintendo faces competition from two other huge home console companies, Sony and Microsoft. Both companies offer a lot of competition, but it didn't always have to be that way. After the success of the Super Nintendo, the company was looking to develop their next big console and improve on the graphical limitations the Super Nintendo offered. This is when Nintendo decided to team up with Sony to develop the Nintendo 64. While both companies made great strides, Nintendo refused to consider the disc technology that Sony was so adamant about. Nintendo stuck to cartridges, Sony went their separate way, and thus the PlayStation was born. Essentially, Nintendo created one of their biggest competitors by refusing to use disc technology. While cartridges worked great for the N64, the PlayStation was able to pack more content into games, use real video footage, and expand their game library to a lot of third-party companies who could publish titles easier and faster on the discs. Nintendo finally understood the benefits of using discs and turned to the technology for the release of the Nintendo GameCube in 2001. It was too little too late as Sony's popularity grew and Nintendo was left with great competition rather than an ally. My Nintendo Rewards. For many years, proud and dedicated Nintendo players found themselves to be members of Club Nintendo. It was more than just a place to tout your massive collection of games. you were actually rewarded with real items and products. Using points earned from purchases and achievements, Club Nintendo featured posters, wallets, and t-shirts gamers could have sent right to their homes. Then, in 2016, Nintendo did the unthinkable by replacing Club Nintendo with a new club known as My Nintendo Rewards. The only problem? There are no actual rewards that players can get. Earning points with My Nintendo Rewards now just feels like a huge waste of time. Instead of actual products or games, players can receive coupons for percentages off games and digital downloads of random desktop wallpapers. It all feels very uninspired and offers no true goals for players to earn towards. The Club Nintendo system was working great, and there was really no good reason for Nintendo to throw it all out the window. My Nintendo Rewards still has time to improve, but after a year of garbage offerings, don't expect too many players to shell out any extra money just to earn more rewards. Adding some cool Nintendo products or Switch downloads will make a huge difference with this system. Selling Rare. Nintendo has worked with several different video game development companies through the years, but one of the most prominent was Rare. Rare really helped build up the Nintendo brand in huge ways. On the Super Nintendo, Rare helped release games like Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, and the whole Battletoads series. Once the Nintendo 64 was released, their gaming library only improved with the Banjo-Kazooie franchise, more Donkey Kong games, Perfect Dark, and GoldenEye 007. With a huge library of hits like this, it was extremely disappointing when Nintendo parted ways with the company in 2002. Rare was purchased by Microsoft, and the company went on to make all kinds of games. This included a Perfect Dark sequel and the Viva Pinata collection of games. Nintendo could have really used the company for the launch of the Wii, as Rare spent years developing games for the Xbox KINECT, including KINECT Sports and KINECT Sports Season 2. The move resulted in a cancelled Donkey Kong game and the potential for more hits like GoldenEye. The GameCube also lost several titles in development as their production moved over to the Xbox and Xbox 360. Players now have the chance to relive some of Rare's big highlights through the years thanks to the Xbox One release of Rare Replay. Philips CDI games. In the early 1990s, the electronics company Philips decided to release their own gaming console entitled the CDI. The console relied on CDs for gameplay and was pretty obscure at the time. Oddly enough, someone at Philips was able to convince Nintendo to loan them both the licenses for Zelda and Mario for the development of games. This shocking move would be completely unheard of in today's gaming landscape. Nevertheless, it happened with Philips, and the results were horrid. One of the Zelda games released for the console was entitled Link: The Faces of Evil. It was a side-scrolling adventure with poor graphics, a weak story, and cutscenes which appear like they were created in MS Paint. The other two, Zelda Wand of Gamelon and Zelda's Adventure, are equally terrible. Nintendo has officially announced that the games are not a part of the official canon, which is a good thing because they feel like fan-made titles. Things were even worse for the release of the Philips Super Mario game titled Mario Hotel. Unlike other games where Mario would defeat enemies and try to take on Bowser, the goal of this game was to shut all of the doors in the hotel. Yes, you heard that correctly. Mario's big puzzle adventure includes shutting doors. Not surprisingly, it's considered the worst Mario game ever created and an embarrassment to the franchise. Virtual Boy. The key to having successful virtual reality is to make it feel as real and virtual as possible. Today's VR headsets feature 360-degree turns, incredible HD graphics, and a lot of ways to interact with various games and apps. This was not the case for Nintendo's Virtual Boy. Released way before its time, the Virtual Boy came out in 1995 and felt like a failure as soon as it was released. Instead of utilizing NES or SNES graphics, the gaming device used a background with red lines to help showcase the 3D properties of the game. This added a lot of limitations and really made games lack in the content department. While the Game Boy was a massive success, the Virtual Boy was a failure in every way. Not only were the controllers uninspired, but the headset and controller were challenging to use. Nintendo threw a lot into the system, including Mario games and third-party titles, but it just couldn't catch on. Anyone who did actually purchase the system complained of headaches, dizziness, and other symptoms that occurred while using the device. Yikes. The console quietly disappeared, and Nintendo improved upon their 3D graphics with the release of the 3DS. The Wii U launch. Oh, the poor Wii U. The console felt like it never stood a chance. Despite some good games like Super Smash Bros. And Mario Party 10, the console felt doomed before it even hit store shelves. One of the main reasons for this was because of the poor marketing the console received. The Wii U name alone was confusing because fans weren't sure if it was an add-on to the Wii or a completely new system. Then, a number of ads catered towards gimmicky features for young children rather than actual gaming older players crave. Then there's the controller, the large and bulky tablet controller. Sure, it was fun to play without needing a TV, but the controller presented all types of problems. When using multiplayer, only one player could use the large tablet device. Other players were forced to use Wii remotes, GameCube controllers, and whatever other compatible accessories you could get your hands on. Thankfully, Nintendo made up for this failure with the release of the Switch. The Switch is what the Wii U wishes it could have been. In many years, players will look back on the Wii U with a chuckle as one of the worst home consoles Nintendo ever produced. Wii gimmick controllers. When the Wii was first released, players could not get enough of the motion movements featured in games like Wii Sports. Then, Mario Kart Wii was released, and the Wii remote could actually be inserted inside of a fake steering wheel. While the gimmick was fun, it was only the beginning for a collection of pointless controller add-ons players bought in droves. What seemed fun at first turned out to be a huge waste of plastic. The Wii remote could be inserted inside a fake basketball, as part of a fishing pole, and even a huge lightsaber for a Star Wars game. It turns out most of these controller extensions were bulky, blocked buttons, and became a huge waste of time. Aside from official Nintendo releases, there were also a number of third-party add-ons including instruments, bowling balls, and wings. Yup, a pair of wings you would flap for the Wii Fit Plus minigame. It was enough spending your hard-earned money on these interactive games. Shelling out extra for the accessories just seemed like a huge waste. Thankfully, the Switch controllers have not introduced any of these crazy accessories yet. They're sticking to basic color palettes for the time being. Nintendo 64 DD. For its time, there was nothing wrong with the Nintendo 64 console. The 3D graphics were a huge improvement over the Super Nintendo. The console had several hits outside of Mario games like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and GoldenEye 007. Instead of releasing a sequel to Super Mario 64 or giving Luigi his own game, the company decided to focus on expanding the console with the Nintendo 64 DD. Didn't Nintendo learn anything from Sega's failed 32X? The expansion of the console would have featured a disk drive that was connected to the bottom of the N64 and used storage disks similar to zip drives. After years of potential development and hype, the Nintendo 64 DD was never released in the United States. It was released in Japan, but was a huge failure for the company. Very few games were developed for the expansion, and fans didn't care for purchasing the add-on when the original console was perfectly fine. The only Mario games released for the expansion were Mario Art games, which actually utilized a computer mouse rather than the N64 controller. They would have been better off with just doing PC releases. Nintendo cut their losses, abandoned the 64 DD, and decided to focus on the GameCube as a result. The Power Glove. When the original NES console was released, there was nothing cooler than plugging in the flash gun and shooting away at ducks, clay discs, or using it for other games. Nintendo then tried to release an accessory even cooler than the gun, simply known as the Power Glove. Instead of holding the basic Nintendo controller, the Power Glove was worn by players over their hand and featured all kinds of buttons and inputs that expanded well beyond the typical A and B buttons. Players could slow down games, move their wrists like motion controls, and program all types of different settings. Of course, this is one of those gadgets that just looks cooler than it actually is. Not only was the Power Glove only released for right-handed players, but it was glitchy, pointless, and didn't even work with every game. Don't let the hype from the video game film The Wizard fool you. The Power Glove is a disappointment in every way. Not only was it a little too bulky for children to play with, but it cost a whopping $75 when it was first released. That money could have gone to a lot more Nintendo cartridge purchases. Wii Online Play. When originally released in 2006, the Wii had everything going for it. There were motion controls, a good library of games, and a lot of hype surrounding the release of multiple Mario and Zelda games. The console had the potential to overtake Microsoft and Sony as the leader in gaming, but one thing hindered that from happening: poor online play. It's like Nintendo was living in the past and didn't care about online gaming at all. While franchises like Call of Duty were getting millions of players on other consoles, it felt like playing a poor imitation reputation on the Wii due to their terrible online services. For games you could play online, it was hard to find friends, the games often lagged, and connection problems occurred often. This often made the Wii feel outdated and sent people to the better performing Xbox 360 and PS3 to get their online gaming fix. If the online gaming was improved, the Wii would have felt less like a novelty console and could have expanded to include a lot more third-party and online titles. Even if you were able to play some games online, that all ended in 2014 when Nintendo shut off the Wii servers and players could no longer connect for online games like Mario Kart Wii. Wow. Well, there you have it. What do you think the biggest failure was? Do you think Nintendo's turned things around with the Switch? Are there any fails we missed? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to TheGamer on YouTube so you can stay up to date with all of our awesome videos. Thanks for watching! 2017 was an awesome year for video games. The Switch was a huge success, Injustice 2 featured better superhero battles than the Justice League, and 4K gaming has finally arrived. Despite all the good, there was plenty of bad. Let's relive the moments we want to forget and see how 2018 can improve on them all, or challenge it to somehow destroy us even further. Before you watch, click subscribe. You'll join our notification squad and be the first to know of new content. Now, enjoy watching the 10 biggest video game fails of 2017. Star Wars loot crates. Yeah, starting with this one is the obvious choice, right? 2017 was filled with plenty of gamer rage, but a majority of it was directed at one game, Star Wars Battlefront 2. The hype for the game had everything going for it. The built-in excitement for Star Wars The Last Jedi, all new campaign modes, and characters like Luke Skywalker helped encourage an instant success. Then, the beta edition of Star Wars Battlefront 2 was released. Gamers were excited to try out the game and check out all the new features until they discovered the dreaded loot crates. The use of loot crates made it a challenge to reach achievements and encouraged a lot of extra spending on top of the base game price. Loot crates and microtransactions have been the subject of controversy for years, but things may have finally come to a head. EA Games made a huge mistake by messing with the force of the Star Wars fanbase. Complaints and protests reached an all-time high, forcing EA to completely change the game and eventually eliminate loot crates altogether. Their statement on the matter became the most downvoted post on Reddit ever. Not just in video games, on the whole website. Now that's saying something. If you were disappointed by Battlefront 2, at least there's some positives to take from it. It should serve as a huge message to gaming companies that we can't be taken advantage of when it comes to microtransactions and in-game purchases. Sonic Forces. The Sonic franchise has been feeding off its nostalgia for years now. Sonic the Hedgehog is recognizable and great as a supporting character in games like Super Smash Bros. Or Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, but he just can't seem to hold his own like he used to. 2017 looked to change that with not one but two game releases starring the famed Blue Hedgehog. The first release was Sonic Mania, a dedication to the glory days of Sonic. The side-scrolling platformer was a great game that features callbacks to Sonic's old days, plenty of characters, and new adventures to explore. Sega even embraced the "and Knuckles" meme by including it as a secret mode in-game. The budget price made it affordable, and Sonic Mania was a nice addition to multiple platforms. But Sega should have stopped there. The second release of the year was Sonic Forces, a full 3D platformer that took multiple years of development and fails to live up to expectations. While Mario is killing it in the 3D realm of Super Mario Odyssey, Sonic is weak in comparison. Sega just can't seem to get the 3D elements of Sonic working well, and it shows. The game is buggy, doesn't flow well, and misses the mark on several levels. It might not be at the Sonic 06 level of bad, but it's not far off. More work should have been put into DLC content for Sonic Mania instead. It's pretty clear Sonic's high-speed formula truly works best in the 2D side-scrolling format. Sega needs to ditch all the gimmicks and stick with the classic Sonic we all know and love. Some of us maybe a little too much. GameStop's rental program. The rise of easy-access digital game downloads has presented some struggles for brick-and-mortar stores like GameStop, but the company continues to fight to keep business booming for gamers who enjoy shopping in an actual store. One way they planned on doing this was with the GameStop Power Pass. The plan was to turn GameStop into a modern-day Blockbuster Video, and it sounded pretty promising. The stores would allow gamers with the Power Pass to rent an unlimited amount of used games while on a paid plan. For $60, the price of a retail game, the Power Pass would last for 6 months. After the 6 months passed, the plan would allow players to keep any used game for free. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Not so fast. Just as quickly as the Power Pass was rolled out, it was completely stopped. There was no direct reason for it to stop, but rumors swirled about outdated register and point-of-sale systems failing to properly implement the rentals. Apparently, the edge cards could barely work on their systems for the first year. It sounds like GameStop needs to work off a newer OS and not their old-ass proprietary version of XP. Once again, GameStop find themselves eating the dust of modern technology and changing ways. The plans could have kept people coming to stores, renting games, and making other purchases. Now there's a bad taste left in the mouths of fans who signed up for the plan only to have it taken away. Hopefully, GameStop can get organized and relaunch the program in 2018. Red Dead Redemption 2's delay. Rockstar Games is still selling Grand Theft Auto 5 like hotcakes, but fans have eagerly been awaiting another sequel from the developer. In the fall of 2017, we were supposed to get our hands on the long-awaited Red Dead Redemption 2, but it looks like we fell for a mirage of sorts. In the spring of this past year, Rockstar Games announced the game would be delayed and pushed back to the first quarter of 2018, which I recall saying they would do the second it was announced for fall because there's no way that was gonna happen. In replacement of pre-orders or some more game previews, the company only released additional screenshots. What a tease. Even with just the screenshots, the game looks incredible, in-depth, and has the potential to excel past the first Red Dead Redemption. We guess the closest you can come to playing Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2017 is revisiting the first one again, or wearing Mario's cowboy outfit in Super Mario Odyssey and getting into some crazy fun. The one benefit of Red Dead Redemption 2's delay is knowing the developer is trying to get everything done right. There's nothing worse than building hype for a game, rushing it into release, and dealing with a buggy game with a few updates to fix these errors. When Red Dead Redemption 2 finally hits store shelves in 2018, it should look and feel as perfect as it sounds. Unless Rob Weedhoff's beautiful voice isn't in the game as John Marston, then I'll be very, very sad. WWE 2K18 for Switch. Just like Madden NFL and the NBA 2K series, wrestling fans look forward to a new game release each year. This year's release was WWE 2K18. Initially released on the Xbox One and PS4, the game features a massive roster, expanded the in-ring competitors from 6 to 8, and features an in-depth story mode with superstars like John Cena and Seth Rollins. In December, the pro wrestling game was ported to the Switch, but in truth, they should have waited until WWE 2K19. The rushed port plays awful. Wrestling matches feel like they're in slow motion. Yes, the frame rates are that bad. The game cannot handle 8 wrestlers at once, so it has a limit of 6. It feels like a downgrade even when compared to Xbox 360 versions of previous releases. When the game is going incredibly slow, it can be incredibly glitchy. The commentary cuts off and often never makes sense. Wrestling moves do not flow evenly, and glitches occur a lot when weapons or other objects are being used. The game also requires a massive download at the point of purchase. If you buy it physically, it's like buying an empty memory card and you still need a separate microSD card on top of it. Other than Mario Kart, the Switch was lacking sports games, and this was not the best way to go. Marvel Heroes bids farewell. Before Disney purchased 20th Century Fox and brought the X-Men along with it, it was rare to see MCU heroes combined with the X-Men and other characters like the Fantastic Four. One of the best ways to see all these heroes together on screen was with the Marvel Heroes game. The MMO featured a huge database of heroes which could be selected for online play. Wolverine could run around with Iron Man, and Deadpool could flirt with Black Widow. Marvel fans rejoiced in playing in the worlds, completing missions, and socializing. Originally released in 2013, Marvel Heroes had an amazing run and even expanded beyond the PC to consoles like the PS4. Then, out of nowhere, Disney pulled the rug out from underneath players, ending their relationship with game developer Gazillion Entertainment, and Marvel Heroes was set to shut down. While players looked forward to the last few months of playing, an even bigger shock came to the gaming community. 1 month ahead of schedule, Marvel Heroes completely shut down. The servers were stopped and players were denied access. We imagine many fans turned into versions of the Hulk as they rampaged about losing their final moments in the game. Gazillion Entertainment completely folded as a company because of it, and we're not sure what's next for Marvel and the online gaming community. Sega Genesis Flashback. Nostalgia was in full force in 2017. People started off the year still trying to track down the NES Classic, only to learn about the release of the Super Nintendo Classic. People were clamoring to play classic games again and to do it with an all-in-one console. Sega also tried to hop on board with the Sega Genesis Flashback console. The gaming console was designed like a classic Sega, but there were many problems that plagued it from the start. No wonder it was so much easier to find than the SNES Classic Edition. The advertising for the console bragged about having at least 90 games, but once you got into the awkward and tough-to-navigate menu, it was clear that nearly 30 of these games were never actually released for the Sega Genesis. You may have gotten excited seeing the classic Sonic games, only to realize that the games played slow, featured poor frame rates, and were nothing like you remembered. The whole thing feels like a rip-off. The hardware itself isn't that great either. The thing is powered using a large AC adapter, and the controller is stiff and cheap feeling. One of the only positives of the system is the ability to play old Sega cartridges that you have lying around. The frame rate may not be great, but you can still get some use out of favorites which may not have been included with the console. Let's hope that the Atari box turns out better than this did. Troll and I. Troll and I would make a great movie. The story follows a young boy named Otto who befriends a large troll after his village is burned down. The pair must solve puzzles, fight off scary enemy creatures, and avoid a hunter looking to take out the troll. The video game version of this story feels like another crappy movie adaptation that didn't translate well into a game. Except it wasn't based off of a movie, and the game had a lot of potential, which ended up being a huge bomb. The game has poor camera controls, some weird concepts, and players can die with just a single hit. One of the very first levels in the game features Otto rolling down a hill as players move him to avoid obstacles. One bad move, and you have to start the whole hill descent again. It's dizzying and doesn't get much better afterwards. The game makes it seem like a sandbox forest, open to explore, but there are clear paths and trigger points that make you feel like you're on rails the entire time. The Nintendo Switch port of the game is even worse than the other versions. Graphics are glitchy, gameplay elements are lacking, and it's just a huge waste of money. You will get trolled if you decide to invest anything into Troll and I. Xbox One X launch. 4K gaming has officially arrived, and fans eagerly awaited the 2017 release of the powerhouse console simply known as the Xbox One X. Priced at $500, the console's hefty expense was backed with powerful hardware, incredible graphics, and the ability to improve upon games already released. So everyone in line at midnight got to purchase the console, plug it in, and realize that there were no launch games to go with it. Launch games are essential for consoles, and it seems almost pointless to not have them. The hype of the 4K graphics was a major letdown because the main title Xbox was going to release got delayed until 2018. They still forged on and released the console, but had no true 4K games to go with it. The game in question was Crackdown 3, an action-adventure sequel where everything in the open world could be destroyed, and all in stunning 4K detail. While the graphic improvements on current HD games are great to look at, 2017 was not the year we would see the true potential of 4K gaming. It's only the beginning, and hopefully anyone who shelled out $500 for the Xbox One X will get their money's worth in the future. Crackdown 3 is currently scheduled for a spring 2018 release with no final date set. Hopefully we're not repeating the same entry on this list in 2019. Mario's failure. Warning: Some major spoilers will follow for Mario games on the Nintendo Switch. 2017 was a banner year for Mario. The release of the Switch showcased the former plumber in hit games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle, and of course, Super Mario Odyssey. While Super Mario Odyssey was nearly a perfect game, it had one major fail, and it involved Mario himself. After years of teasing, 2017 finally felt like the year Mario and Peach would tie the knot and declare their love for each other. It was hinted at in game trailers, wedding attire was featured on amiibo figures, and Nintendo officially referred to Mario as a former plumber. Anyone who actually played the game would quickly realize that this was not the case, and Mario failed big time. During the climactic cinematic scene featuring Mario, Princess Peach, and Bowser, both Bowser and Mario beg for Peach's attention and love. The end result? Peach ditches them both and starts to fly away on the Odyssey ship. Not only was Mario dumped by Peach, but she tried to fly away and abandon the poor guy on the moon. It appears like no matter how many times Mario rescues Peach, there will never be a true happy ending for the couple. Well, we still have some hope for Luigi and Daisy at least. Super Luigi Odyssey, anyone? Wow, well, there you have it. So, what do you think was the biggest gaming fail of 2017? What was the biggest success? Anything we missed? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to The Gamer so you can stay up to date with our awesome videos. Thanks for watching.
Welcome back to The Gamer. Today we're discussing video game art because, well, have you ever noticed errors in some of the game art of the industry's top titles? We have too. It's actually surprising how often this happens. From the earliest classics to the latest releases, we delve into some of the most unforgettable mistakes that somehow made it into the final production. If you haven't already, support the team. Click the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest content. Stick around as we take a stroll down memory lane and look at 10 unforgettable video game box art mistakes. Spirit Camera, the Cursed Memoir. Okay, let's kick this shebang off with one for the Nintendo 3DS fans out there. Maybe you'll know, but this game is a spin-off of the Fatal Frame series, a well-loved spooky game where you have a camera and ghosts appear around you. It made for a bunch of scary moments in video games and earned a spot alongside such greats like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The actual game cover has a part of a ghost and a spooky environment, but there's definitely no camera to be seen. Instead, there's a book. You heard that right, a book. It's supposed to be a reference to the game itself where the main story revolves around a girl named Maya who's somehow trapped in a scary monster book or something. There are AR elements in the game, which is an interesting way to integrate the features of the 3DS, but still the book is accessed with the 3DS's camera called the Camera Obscura in-game, and that's still not referenced in the cover, but they went with a book. And while we cue the facepalm gifs, it should be confessed we sort of recognize this hubris. Someone clearly could not have cared less. Gal Gun Double Piece. Time to laugh. Take a look at this picture. E for everyone? Why? For suggestive content, of course. Said no one ever. This is one of those games. If someone sees this in your game library, they're immediately gonna have their judgy eyes all over you, and it may or may not be completely warranted. Let's be honest though, it'll be completely warranted. Judgments aside, the meat of Gal Gun Double Piece is something that could never be interpreted as family friendly. It's a rail shooter that involves you shooting questionably aged Japanese schoolgirls with your love gun. We promise you that sentence is completely factual. You will indeed shoot young girls with your love gun. So why, in all possible realms of existence, did the actual physical copies of this game, which exist solely for those who want to hold their bad decisions in their hands, have an E rating? Even more mind-boggling, why does it say it's rated E even when it's saying it's got suggestive content? You know, like the other suggestive content found in E-rated games? Let's rewind. Maybe not all E games passed the morality test, or someone was asleep on the job. Either way, this game somehow made it to the store shelves with an E rating. Hola! Did you hear about the latest addition to our family? The Richest Español is the perfect place for all you native Spanish speakers out there. Don't speak Spanish? No problem, come on over. This is the perfect place to practice. Amazing facts, interesting people, and funny pictures. Check out The Richest Español today. The Imagine series. another title for you Nintendo 3DS fans. This one's for a game you probably never bought, but seriously guys, we need to talk about shovelware. Please don't buy it, and please don't let your parents or grandparents buy it and act like it's a nice thing. It's not. Being a part of the problem is never a nice thing, and until we stop being the problem, we're still gonna get games like the Imagine series. A giant pile of misogyny, the series suggests the woman's main role in society is to cook, clean, take care of things, and have babies. Oh, right, this video is about video game covers. It turns out this series was created by people so lazy they couldn't be bothered to remove the watermarks from the awful stock photo pictures they used to make the cover art. And there's way too many games in this series. Well, even one game is too many games, but there have been way too many mistakes in previous games for this to have been done on purpose. Maybe it's just a problem prone to the Nintendo 3DS given the whole shovelware thing, but we suspect there are more games which were lost in translation. Super Mario Galaxy. We're not doing our jobs if we're not making you laugh, and here we go with another one sure to make you smile. Let's talk about Super Mario Galaxy. If there's one thing the Mario series is known for, it's repeating the same pattern, and people still buy the game like it's the second coming. Every Mario game is made for the whole family to enjoy. You're jumping on enemies and collecting stars. It's pure video game fun. However, we know E doesn't always mean for everyone, and we know that Disney has had its run-ins with creative illustrators in the past. But back to Mario. When this game made its big debut on the Wii, everyone was psyched. Super Mario Galaxy was a return to the classic gameplay, but it had a spacey setting and a different princess. The cover, however, had everyone's inner middle school kid chuckling and snorting. Turns out the game's cover placed stars over certain letters in the game's name. That made it spell out, "You are Mr. Gay." It was obviously a really funny coincidence, but there was no way it wasn't gonna get lampooned by the internet. BOMBERSHOCK. Sometimes there's no way to unsee something once you've seen it. This is one for all our BioShock fans out there. We hope you don't think those big daddies are soft after we tell you this one. In BioShock 2, you were in the shoes of one of BioShock 1's big scary monsters, the Big Daddies. It also took steps to more fully develop the world of Rapture and the complex, symbiotic relationship between Big Daddies and Little Sisters in the BioShock universe. But even though Take-Two was unhappy with the game selling less than 5 million copies across all platforms in 2 months, it was a great companion and successor to a game that injected story, philosophy, and didactic storytelling into a bloated genre with generic plots about shooting all the bad guys. The game's cover, however, was nothing short of a betrayal. Although it had the glowing, creepy eyes of the little sister, the massive drill of the Big Daddy, and the rust-covered logo almost out-fallouting Fallout, the Big Daddy's helmet looks too much like another, less serious video game character. Just look at the picture, folks. There's no way you're not seeing Bomberman from here on out whenever you look at this picture. Super Mario Bros. We'd probably looked at the original Super Mario Bros. Cartridge about 5 billion times by the time we turned 10. It's a conservative amount, so imagine our surprise when we looked at the cover for the 5 billionth and first time and we realized Mario is running into a wall. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, physically, and judging by the motion lines he's built up behind him, he's doing it with a ton of force. We would also like to make it known here that Mario knows he's gonna die as well. How do we know this, you ask? Well, he's doing what we did when we realized we'd screwed up in a Mario game. Hit all the buttons. That's why he shot a fireball into the wall in the desperate hope somehow that'll save him. It will not. He'll fall into the lava and have to run the level all over again, which, since we're thinking about it, is an accurate depiction of the game playing experience. If anything, at some point you'll run into a wall, panic press all the buttons on your controller just before you meet certain death, and then you'll die. Fitting. FIFA 08. Sports games have a history of being almost as bad at Photoshop as some magazines. Although Cosmopolitan and Vanity Fair may have them beat on race exclusivity and body dysmorphia, sports games have a tendency to turn the people on their covers into supermen, normal human locomotion be forgotten, or normal human anatomy be forgotten. The body dysmorphia occurs to both sexes here, people. But with FIFA 08, not only do we have 3 of the most ridiculous celebratory faces, which without context seem like the most hilarious faces we've ever seen, but what in the heck did they do to Ronaldinho's arm? He's the guy in the middle for all you footy fanatics. His arm looks like it's some bizarre folded over chicken wing. Also, his fist is the same size as his entire shoulder muscle. There's so many things wrong here, you have to wonder why this picture was the best one out of the millions of pictures they took. It's not like EA didn't have the money to make a decent cover. Maybe they didn't care or didn't have the time, because who really looked at the covers anyways? Not us, no, not the ones who just spent $60 on the game. GoldenEye 007. Listen, we know, any criticism of GoldenEye is borderline blasphemous at best, but we've spoken about how awesome of a game GoldenEye is time and time again. It was a magical game that made us all believe we were a tiny Asian man chopping Pierce Brosnan or whatever you guys did with it. Whatever, what we did doesn't matter, it's the memories that do, and one of the things most people don't remember is the black and white used in the game's cover art. It ends up giving those who look at it too long a pretty entertaining optical illusion. Let us know in the comment section if you already knew this one. See, it turns out when you put a black and white hand next to a black and white mouth, the finger separation and shade from the gun the hand happens to be holding ends up creating a really long, stern expression. Maybe they should have switched the color palette up, but even then, the damage has been done. In this case, what's been seen can never truly be unseen. And for this iconic title, the game developers gave Pierce Brosnan, aka 007, aka Bond James Bond, a frog face. It's hard to take him seriously after this gaffe. Mega Man. This one's hard. We can't just figure out how to approach this. If you thought you were going to get a nice little intro to segue into the meat of this title, you were wrong. Honestly, there's not much we can really say. You'll just have to look at this photo to see what we're talking about here. Because with just one look, even if you've never played a single video game, let alone if you're familiar with the artwork of Keiji Inafune, you know something is wrong. Just from the cut rate art school standpoint, what the heck? Are his shoulders and collarbones C-shaped? Where are his forearms? How is the hand holding the gun even physically possible? Why is he holding a gun? This is the North American cover. The Japanese cover looks like this. It's actually decent. It just seems like when it got to Capcom of America, they thought the cartoony art style wouldn't fly, even though anime and Japanese art weren't unpopular to North American audiences. So we got this incredibly dated, realistic fantasy sci-fi stuff that's only good to laugh at. But if you have it, it's also good enough to hang on your wall because let's face it, we're guessing some of you are out there. Eric and the Floaters. And last but not least, we present to you the pinnacle of our list, the top achievement in all things poor video game artwork. Before we get started, a little history. This game was essentially just Bomberman with a different name and was released in Europe in 1983. From a design standpoint, the cover makes it look like the full title of the game is Kuma MSX Eric and the Floaters. But Kuma is actually just the name of the publisher, and MSX is the gaming system. And that's where things start to get weird. We're not sure if you can technically call this cover a mistake, but it's something. For some reason, Kuma's font seems to be very similar to another famous fantasy game, Loom, which was released by LucasArts back in 1990. But then look at the character on the cover. Presumably Eric, he bears a striking resemblance to a certain whip-wielding hero of the big screen. That's right, Indy. That's not weird, we hear you saying. Indiana Jones was released before Eric and the Floaters. And we can admit that, sure, but look in his hand. That's not simply a potato. It looks almost exactly like a Sankara stone from the movie The Temple of Doom released in 1984. Speaking of Doom, here's the absolute weirdest thing about this cover. It's eerily similar to the iconic Doom box art, and Doom didn't come out until 1993, a full decade after Eric